It moves without legs at all. No feet. No claws. Nothing pushing off the ground the way almost every other animal on land relies on to get anywhere. And yet, somehow, a snake can cross open desert sand, climb straight up a tree trunk, slip silently through water, and squeeze through gaps barely wider than its own body, all without a single limb to help it along. Watch a snake move for the first time, really watch it, and it starts to feel almost like some kind of trick, a body defying what should be physically possible. There is no obvious mechanism, no visible legs pushing or pulling, just a long, smooth body flowing forward as if gravity and friction simply do not apply to it the way they apply to everything else. Tonight, we are going to slowly uncover the hidden trick behind this strange, silent kind of movement. We will look inside a snake's body, at a skeleton built almost entirely of ribs and vertebrae, more of them than nearly any other animal alive. We will explore the different ways a snake actually gets from one place to another, several distinct methods, each suited to a different kind of ground. And we will trace this whole story back further still, to a time when snakes actually did have legs, before evolution quietly decided something else would work even better. We begin with the skeleton itself, since that is really where this entire trick starts, buried quietly beneath skin and scale, in a structure considerably stranger and more complex than most people would ever guess just from watching a snake glide silently past. Most animals with a backbone carry somewhere between 20 and 50 vertebrae, give or take, depending on the species. A snake carries considerably more, sometimes well over 300 individual vertebrae stacked one after another along the entire length of its body. Each one of these vertebrae is paired with its own set of ribs, curving gently around the body, repeated again and again down the snake's entire length. This sheer number of individual, moving parts is really the heart of the whole trick. Where a human spine bends at only a limited number of points, a snake's spine bends everywhere, continuously, smoothly, every single vertebra able to shift slightly against its neighbors. Multiply that small amount of flexibility by 300 separate joints, and the result is a body capable of curving, coiling, and flowing in ways no legged animal could ever manage. The muscles running alongside this long chain of bones matter just as much as the bones themselves. Snakes carry layers of muscle running in different directions along their body, some short and connecting just a few vertebrae at a time, others stretching much further along the spine. Working together, these muscles can contract in careful, coordinated waves, pulling one section of the body while another pushes, creating the fluid, continuous motion we recognize instantly as a snake moving forward. It is worth pausing on just how much coordination this actually requires. Hundreds of small joints and layered muscles all working together in careful sequence, without any conscious counting or planning happening at all, simply an old, deeply practiced rhythm the body carries out automatically every time the snake decides to move. The most familiar way a snake moves, the one most people picture immediately, is called serpentine motion, that classic side-to-side S-shaped wiggle rippling down the entire length of the body. It looks almost effortless, but underneath that smooth appearance sits a surprisingly clever use of simple physics. As a snake pushes its body into that S-curve shape, each bend presses sideways against small bumps, rocks, or uneven patches on the ground. That sideways pressure creates friction, and the snake uses that friction as something to push against, essentially the same way a person might push off the wall of a swimming pool. Each curve of the body shoves backward against the ground just slightly, and that backward push translates into forward motion for the snake as a whole. This method works best on ground with a bit of texture, dirt, grass, leaf litter, anything offering small points of resistance the snake's body can press against. On a perfectly smooth, flat surface with nothing to push against, this same S-shaped wiggle would actually accomplish very little, which is part of why a snake struggles considerably more to move across polished tile or glass than it does across an ordinary forest floor covered in twigs and uneven ground. This is also why a snake placed suddenly on a smooth kitchen floor often looks strangely clumsy compared to how effortlessly it moves outdoors. The same body, the same muscles, simply lacking anything solid nearby to properly push against. Not every snake relies on that classic side-to-side wiggle, though. Larger, heavier snake species, particularly big constrictors, often use an entirely different technique called rectilinear movement, where the body travels in a straight line without any obvious side-to-side bending at all. Watching this in person can look almost eerie, a heavy, muscular body simply gliding forward in one smooth, continuous line. This method relies heavily on the snake's belly scales, working in careful coordination with muscles attached directly beneath them. Sections of the belly lift very slightly, shift forward just a touch, then press back down and grip the ground, while the section behind repeats the exact same motion a moment later. It is a slow, deliberate ripple traveling from head to tail, each section taking its turn gripping and releasing in sequence. Rectilinear movement tends to be considerably slower than the classic wiggling motion, but it offers a real advantage for larger snakes moving through tight, narrow spaces, since the body barely widens out to either side at all. It is often the movement of choice for a heavy python easing quietly along a narrow branch or through dense undergrowth, where there simply is not enough room on either side to manage a proper S-shaped curve. Watching this method up close can feel almost hypnotic, a slow, steady ripple traveling the entire length of a heavy body, the skin itself seeming to flow gently forward while the animal underneath barely appears to move at all. Let us pause here for a moment, resting quietly and simply picturing a calm scene. A warm forest floor covered in a soft carpet of fallen leaves, dappled sunlight filtering down through the canopy above. Somewhere along that quiet ground, a snake moves slowly and silently forward, body rippling gently from head to tail, barely disturbing the leaves it passes over. There is something oddly peaceful about watching this kind of movement unfold, patient, smooth, entirely without hurry. No footsteps, no rustling scramble, just a long, continuous line flowing quietly across the forest floor, exactly the way it has for tens of millions of years. Somewhere nearby, A soft breeze moves through the branches overhead, and for a moment, the whole scene settles into that particular, unhurried stillness only a quiet forest afternoon seems to hold. We will continue shortly, traveling next into the open desert, where a very different kind of movement takes over entirely, one built specifically for a surface that offers almost nothing solid to push against at all. Loose desert sand presents a genuinely difficult problem for a snake's usual side-to-side wiggle. Sand simply shifts and gives way under any sideways pressure, offering almost nothing solid for the snake's body to push against. For snakes living in these environments, evolution found a clever, considerably more specialized solution called sidewinding. In sidewinding, only a small part of the snake's body actually touches the ground at any given moment, typically two separate points rather than the body's full length pressed flat against the surface. The snake lifts most of its body up and slightly forward, plants a new section down onto the sand, then lifts the previous section and repeats the motion, moving in a distinctive, looping, almost sideways path across the surface rather than moving straight forward the way other methods generally do. This technique dramatically reduces how much body surface actually contacts the loose, shifting sand at any one moment, which in turn reduces how much the snake sinks into it, allowing surprisingly fast, efficient travel across terrain that would otherwise make normal movement nearly impossible. Watching a sidewinder move across open desert leaves a distinctive, looping trail of separate marks in the sand, quite unlike the single continuous line left behind by snakes using more ordinary methods elsewhere. This particular trail has become so recognizable that trackers and desert researchers can often identify a sidewinding species simply by studying the distinctive, evenly spaced pattern of marks left behind in the sand overnight, long after the snake itself has already moved on. There is one more major movement style worth exploring, called concertina movement, used particularly in tight, confining spaces where a snake has little room to stretch out or curve properly to either side. Picture the folding, accordion-like motion of a paper fan opening and closing, and you have a fairly good mental image of how this particular technique actually works. The snake anchors the back portion of its body firmly against the walls of a narrow tunnel, crevice, or branch, then extends its front section forward as far as it can reach. Once that front section finds a new, secure grip, the snake pulls the rear portion forward to meet it, bunching the body together briefly before extending forward again, repeating this slow, careful folding and unfolding motion step by step. This method sacrifices speed almost entirely in exchange for control, useful specifically in situations where a snake needs real stability and precision rather than quick, fluid movement. It shows up frequently among tree-climbing species navigating narrow branches, and among snakes moving through tight burrows or rocky crevices where there simply is not enough open space for any of the other movement styles explored so far to work effectively at all. Watching a snake use this technique feels almost deliberate compared to its usual fluid grace elsewhere, each small extension and pull carefully measured, a reminder that even an animal built for effortless gliding sometimes needs to slow down and work carefully through a genuinely difficult stretch of terrain. Underneath nearly every one of these movement styles sits one particularly important structure, the snake's belly scales, technically called ventral scales. These are the wide, overlapping plates running along the entire underside of a snake's body, and they function considerably more like sophisticated tools than simple, passive covering. Each individual belly scale connects to its own small set of muscles, allowing a snake to lift, angle, or press down on that specific scale somewhat independently from its neighbors. This gives the snake a remarkable degree of fine control over exactly which parts of its underside are gripping the ground firmly at any given moment, similar in some ways to how the individual treads on a tire grip a road surface, each one contributing its own small, precise bit of traction. This scale-by-scale control becomes especially important during rectilinear movement, where those slow, rippling waves of contraction rely entirely on precise, sequential gripping and releasing along the belly. Without this kind of fine, independent control over individual scales, that particular smooth, straight-line gliding motion simply would not be possible at all. It is a genuinely elegant piece of natural engineering when you stop to consider it properly, hundreds of small, independently controlled plates working together in careful sequence, turning something as ordinary looking as a snake's underside into a remarkably sophisticated tool for gripping nearly any surface it happens to encounter. This same basic body plan, hundreds of flexible vertebrae, powerful layered muscle, and those uniquely adaptable belly scales, turns out to be remarkably versatile once you start looking at where snakes actually live. Tree-dwelling species use a modified form of that same concertina technique to grip branches securely while climbing, often aided by a more prehensile, gripping tail that can wrap firmly around a branch for extra stability while the rest of the body reaches forward. Aquatic snakes, meanwhile, rely heavily on that same classic serpentine wiggle explored earlier, except now pushing against water instead of solid ground. The physics work out surprisingly similarly, each curve of the body still pressing sideways against resistance, water in this case rather than dirt or sand, propelling the snake forward with smooth, wave-like efficiency through the water. Burrowing snakes favor a more compact, straight-line style closer to rectilinear movement, useful for pushing steadily through tight, confined tunnels underground. Across nearly every environment on Earth, desert, forest, water, underground burrows, and tree branches high overhead, this same basic body plan simply gets fine-tuned slightly differently, proving flexible enough to handle an extraordinarily wide range of physical challenges. It is a genuinely remarkable example of a single, simple design proving adaptable enough to conquer nearly every kind of terrain a land animal could reasonably encounter, all without ever needing to add a single limb along the way. All of this remarkable flexibility raises a genuinely fascinating question, one that leads back deep into evolutionary history. Snakes were not always legless. Fossil evidence clearly shows early snake ancestors that still carried small, functional hind limbs, and even today, certain living species, particularly pythons and boas, still carry tiny leg remnants called spurs, small, claw-like projections near the base of the tail, leftover evidence of legs their distant ancestors once actually used. Scientists studying this transition believe the gradual loss of limbs likely connects closely to either a burrowing or an aquatic ancestor, an early snake relative that found legs increasingly unnecessary, or even physically inconvenient, for squeezing through tight underground tunnels or swimming smoothly through water. Over an enormous stretch of evolutionary time, legs gradually shrank, generation after generation, eventually disappearing almost entirely, replaced instead by this remarkably sophisticated, flexible body plan explored throughout tonight's story. There is still more of this quiet story left to explore, a closer look at exactly how this ancient transition unfolded, and a final, calming reflection on the many different snakes, desert dwellers, tree climbers, and river swimmers alike, each resting peacefully tonight in their own particular corner of the world, carrying forward, quietly, one of the most remarkable and adaptable body plans nature has ever produced. The fossil record tells this evolutionary story with genuine clarity once you know where to look. Several remarkably preserved ancient snake fossils show small but clearly functional hind limbs, complete with tiny hip bones and leg bones, tucked near the base of what would eventually become simply a long, tapering tail in modern species. These fossils represent snakes caught, in a sense, partway through their transition away from legs entirely. Researchers studying these ancient specimens have found that the legs themselves appear to have shrunk gradually rather than disappearing all at once, growing smaller and less functional across many successive generations, likely alongside gradual changes elsewhere in the body better suited to a body plan built increasingly around length and flexibility rather than limbs. This gradual, patient shrinking mirrors a pattern seen elsewhere throughout evolutionary history. Structures that become less useful for a species' particular lifestyle tend to shrink slowly over time rather than vanishing abruptly, sometimes leaving behind small, quiet remnants long after their original function has effectively disappeared entirely. It is a genuinely fascinating thing to sit with, imagining an ancient snake ancestor still using its tiny legs occasionally, even as they grew steadily less useful, generation after generation, until eventually they simply stopped forming at all. Those tiny leg remnants mentioned earlier, called spurs, remain genuinely visible today in certain living snake species, particularly pythons and boas. Located near the base of the tail, these small, claw-like projections are considerably reduced compared to an actual functioning leg, but they retain enough of the original skeletal structure that researchers can trace a clear, direct line back to the hip and leg bones seen in those ancient fossil specimens. Interestingly, these spurs are not simply useless leftover parts sitting quietly unused. Male pythons, in particular, sometimes use their spurs during courtship, gently stroking a potential mate as part of a broader mating ritual, giving this ancient, otherwise vestigial structure a small, continuing purpose within modern snake behavior, even long after its original function as part of an actual walking leg disappeared entirely. This detail offers a small, satisfying reminder that evolution rarely wastes anything completely. Even structures reduced dramatically from their original form and function can sometimes find themselves repurposed towards something new, a quiet, ongoing thread connecting ancient anatomy to modern behavior in ways that would have been impossible to predict in advance. Scientists studying exactly why snakes lost their legs in the first place have proposed two main competing theories, each pointing toward a slightly different ancestral lifestyle. One theory suggests early snake ancestors were primarily burrowing animals, living most of their lives underground in tight, narrow tunnels where legs would have been more of a hindrance than a help, easily catching on soil or roots rather than assisting with efficient movement through such confined spaces. The second major theory points instead toward an aquatic ancestor, an early snake relative that spent considerable time swimming through water, where a long, smooth, limbless body would have offered a clear advantage over one interrupted by four separate limbs, creating unnecessary drag. Under this theory, the loss of legs happened gradually as this aquatic ancestor's body became increasingly streamlined for efficient swimming. Both theories remain actively debated among paleontologists today, with different fossil discoveries occasionally lending support to one side or the other. It is entirely possible that both burrowing and aquatic pressures played some meaningful role, working together across different branches of the early snake family tree, rather than one single explanation applying cleanly to every ancestor involved. Let us pause here for a moment, drifting away from deeper evolutionary questions and simply resting in a calmer, quieter scene instead. A shallow, sunlit stream cutting gently through soft, ancient mud, somewhere in a world tens of millions of years removed from anything resembling today. Somewhere in that quiet water, an early snake ancestor moves slowly along the streambed, tiny hind limbs still present, though already smaller and less useful than they once were. There is something quietly moving about picturing this particular moment, a creature caught gently between two very different versions of itself, legs slowly fading toward irrelevance, while an entirely new, remarkably capable way of moving through the world was still quietly taking shape underneath it all. The water moves gently around it, sunlight scattering softly across the shallow current, the whole scene entirely unaware of just how significant this quiet, gradual transition would eventually turn out to be for every snake that would ever follow. We will continue shortly, gathering together everything explored throughout this documentary, and settling into a final, peaceful reflection on the many different snakes resting quietly tonight, each in its own particular corner of the world. Modern genetic research has added considerable additional detail to this older, fossil-based picture of snake evolution. Scientists studying snake DNA have identified specific genes responsible for limb development, the very same genes that, in lizards and other reptiles, carefully guide the formation of legs during early embryonic development. In snakes, these same genes are still present, but they have been altered or switched off at a crucial early stage, preventing legs from properly forming at all. This discovery helps explain, at a genetic level, exactly how legs disappeared so thoroughly across the snake lineage, not through the genes themselves vanishing entirely, but through small changes in when and how those genes get activated during development. It is a remarkably subtle kind of evolutionary change, a slight shift in genetic timing producing an entirely different, legless body plan across countless subsequent generations. Researchers studying python embryos specifically have even observed tiny leg buds beginning to form very early in development, only to stop growing and eventually disappear almost entirely before hatching, a brief, fleeting echo of that ancient, four-legged ancestor still quietly present within every single embryo, however briefly, before evolution's more recent instructions finally take over completely. This entire evolutionary journey, from four-legged ancestor to today's remarkably flexible, legless body plan, represents one of the more striking examples anywhere in nature of an animal successfully trading one strategy for an entirely different, ultimately more versatile one. Losing legs might initially sound like a significant disadvantage, yet it clearly was not, since snakes have gone on to thrive across nearly every environment and continent on the planet, considerably more successful, in terms of sheer numbers and diversity, than most limbed reptiles sharing the same habitats. This success suggests that what snakes gained, extraordinary flexibility, the ability to squeeze through impossibly tight spaces, several genuinely versatile movement styles suited to almost any terrain, more than compensated for whatever advantages four legs might have otherwise provided. Nature, once again, demonstrates that there is rarely only one correct solution to the challenge of getting from one place to another. It is a genuinely humbling thought to sit with, that losing something as fundamental as legs, rather than representing a step backward, actually opened the door toward one of the most successful and widespread body plans found anywhere among land animals today. Considering everything explored throughout this documentary so far, from hundreds of individual vertebrae working in careful coordination, to the several distinct movement styles suited to sand, forest floor, tight crevice, and open water alike, to the deep evolutionary history stretching back to actual, functioning legs, a genuinely complete picture starts to settle quietly into place. A snake's ability to move without legs at all is not some simple trick or shortcut. It represents an extraordinarily sophisticated, carefully refined system, built patiently across an enormous stretch of evolutionary time. Every wiggle, every smooth glide across open sand, every careful, folding movement through a narrow crevice, all of it traces back to that same underlying foundation, hundreds of flexible joints, precisely coordinated muscle, and belly scales capable of remarkably fine, independent control, refined slowly and patiently since the earliest days when a distant ancestor still carried tiny, functioning legs of its own. What began as a simple curiosity, wondering how something without legs manages to move at all, has revealed itself to be one of the more elegant, thoroughly documented examples anywhere in nature of an entire body plan reshaping itself completely around a single, remarkably successful evolutionary trait. Let us settle once more into a calmer, quieter reflection before this documentary comes to its own gentle close. Picture, one more time, a quiet desert evening, sand cooling slowly as the sun dips below a distant ridge. Somewhere out there, a sidewinder rests curled quietly in a shallow depression it has dug for itself, safely tucked away from the coldest hours of the coming night. Elsewhere, in a warm, humid forest a world away, a tree-dwelling snake rests coiled comfortably around a sturdy branch high overhead, entirely secure despite the height, its body wrapped with the same careful, confident grip it uses while climbing during the day. And in a quiet river somewhere else entirely, a water snake floats gently near the surface, barely stirring the calm water around it, perfectly at ease in an environment built around movement it has mastered just as thoroughly as its desert and forest relatives elsewhere. Three completely different settings, three completely different challenges, and yet each snake rests just as calmly and just as confidently as the others, each one perfectly adapted to the particular corner of the world it happens to call home. We will continue shortly, gathering these final, peaceful images together, before finally bringing this whole remarkable story to its own quiet close. Three entirely different environments, desert, forest canopy, and calm river water, and yet each one home to a snake perfectly suited to its own particular corner of the world, all sharing that same fundamental body plan explored throughout this entire documentary, simply adapted slightly differently depending on the specific challenges each environment happens to present. There is something deeply reassuring in recognizing this pattern, one basic design, refined patiently across millions of years, proving flexible enough to conquer sand, branch, and water alike, without ever needing legs at all. Whatever terrain a snake happens to call home, that same underlying system, vertebrae, muscle, and scale working together in careful coordination, remains fundamentally the same story, simply told slightly differently depending on where it happens to unfold. Tonight, somewhere across nearly every corner of this planet, snakes are resting quietly in exactly this way, desert, forest, water, tucked safely into whatever particular environment they call home, each one carrying forward this same remarkable, ancient system of movement, entirely unaware of just how sophisticated and hard-won their own quiet stillness actually is. Bringing this entire journey together now, we have traveled from a snake's remarkable skeleton, hundreds of vertebrae and ribs working in careful coordination, through the several distinct movement styles suited to sand, forest floor, narrow crevice, and open branch alike, through the quiet, precise mechanics of individually controlled belly scales, and finally back through deep evolutionary time, to actual, functioning legs slowly fading into small, quiet remnants still carried by certain snakes today. What began as a simple, strange question, how something without legs at all manages to move so gracefully across nearly every environment on Earth, has revealed itself to be a genuinely sophisticated, remarkably elegant system, refined patiently across tens of millions of years of quiet, gradual evolutionary change. There is something deeply calming in finally understanding this hidden trick, a reminder that even the simplest, most ordinary sights, a snake gliding quietly across a forest floor, or resting curled beneath warm desert sand, often carry considerably more complexity and history than they first appear to hold. There is a particular kind of quiet wonder in realizing just how completely snakes have mastered nearly every physical challenge a body might reasonably face without the help of limbs. Consider, for a moment, the sheer range of surfaces explored throughout this documentary already: loose desert sand, dense forest leaf litter, narrow rocky crevices, slender tree branches high overhead, and open water offering no solid footing at all. Most animals rely on legs specifically because different terrains demand different solutions, and legs, with their joints and independent movement, offer a flexible answer to nearly all of them. A snake solves this same problem an entirely different way, not through separate limbs adapted to separate tasks, but through one single, continuous, endlessly adjustable body capable of reshaping its own movement style entirely depending on what the ground beneath it happens to require. This is, in its own quiet way, a considerably more elegant solution than four separate legs each needing their own coordination, since a snake's entire body essentially functions as one long, continuously adaptable limb, capable of gripping, pushing, folding, or gliding depending on the exact demands of the moment. It is worth sitting with that difference for a moment, since it reframes the entire story explored throughout this documentary. Losing legs was never simply subtraction. It was, in a very real sense, a trade towards something else entirely, a body plan built around adaptability itself rather than a fixed set of specialized parts. Think, for a moment, about how much simpler this design actually is compared to a legged animal: no separate limbs to coordinate independently, no complicated joints requiring their own particular timing, simply one long, continuous structure capable of shifting its behavior smoothly from one section to the next. There is a certain quiet elegance in that simplicity, a reminder that the most sophisticated solutions in nature are not always the most complicated ones. Snake movement research has attracted genuine interest well beyond biology alone, particularly among engineers designing robots meant to navigate difficult or unpredictable terrain. Search and rescue robots modeled loosely on snake locomotion have been developed specifically because this same limbless, segmented design offers real advantages when navigating collapsed buildings, rubble, or other tight, unpredictable spaces where wheeled or legged robots frequently become stuck or damaged. These robotic designs borrow directly from the biological principles explored throughout this documentary: dozens of small, independently controlled segments linked together, capable of shifting between different movement styles depending on the terrain encountered, much like a real snake shifting fluidly between serpentine, rectilinear, or concertina movement depending on the ground beneath it. Engineers studying real snake movement in careful detail have found that replicating even a rough approximation of this natural design in a mechanical robot required considerably more complexity than initially expected, a quiet testament to just how sophisticated this biological system actually is. This ongoing collaboration between biology and engineering offers a genuinely interesting modern chapter to this ancient story. Snakes, having spent millions of years perfecting a legless body plan purely through the slow, patient process of evolution, now quietly influencing how humans design machines meant to navigate some of the most difficult terrain imaginable. Let us pause here for a moment, drifting away from robotics and engineering, and simply resting in a calmer, quieter scene instead. A narrow rocky canyon somewhere in the desert, walls rising steeply on either side, the last warm light of evening catching the top edges of stone while shadows deepen slowly across the canyon floor below. Somewhere within one of the many narrow cracks lining those canyon walls, a snake moves slowly and carefully using that same folding, concertina motion explored earlier in this story, patient, deliberate, entirely unhurried. There is something quietly satisfying about picturing this scene, an animal perfectly suited to a space most other creatures would find impossibly difficult to navigate, moving through it with the same calm confidence it might show gliding across an open, sandy stretch of desert floor elsewhere. Somewhere far above the canyon rim, the last birds of the day settle quietly into their own resting spots for the night, while below, entirely unnoticed by anything overhead, this one small, patient snake continues its slow, careful passage through solid rock, in no particular hurry to reach anywhere at all. The canyon grows quiet as evening properly settles in, the last light fading gradually from the highest rocks above. We will continue shortly, exploring a few more remarkable details about how different snake species have adapted this same basic body plan toward genuinely surprising specialized abilities. Some snake species have taken this remarkable body plan even further, developing genuinely surprising specialized movement abilities beyond the core styles explored earlier in this documentary. Certain tree-dwelling species, for example, are capable of a behavior sometimes described as gliding, flattening their bodies dramatically and forming a subtle concave shape along their underside, allowing them to glide short distances through the air between trees, using undulating movements mid-flight to help steer and control their descent. This gliding ability, found among a small number of specialized tree snake species, represents an extraordinary extension of the same basic flexibility explored throughout this entire documentary, the same hundreds of vertebrae and finely controlled muscles that allow ordinary crawling and climbing repurposed towards something considerably more dramatic, controlled aerial movement without any wings at all. Other species have developed specialized swimming adaptations far beyond simple serpentine movement through water, including flattened, paddle-like tails that provide considerably more propulsion than an ordinary rounded tail ever could, allowing certain sea snake species to spend nearly their entire lives in open ocean water, rarely if ever needing to return to solid land at all. These specializations, gliding, paddle-tailed swimming, and everything already explored earlier throughout this documentary, all point toward the very same underlying truth, that this basic body plan, hundreds of vertebrae paired with careful, coordinated muscle, is genuinely flexible enough to be reshaped, gradually and patiently, into forms suited for nearly any environment a snake's ancestors happen to encounter across their long evolutionary history. Sea snakes deserve particular attention here, since they represent perhaps the most thoroughly water-adapted branch of the entire snake family, some species capable of remaining submerged for well over an hour at a time between breaths, propelled by that same flattened, paddle-shaped tail mentioned earlier, working in careful coordination with the same fundamental serpentine movement explored much earlier in this documentary. These sea snakes have also developed specialized valves capable of sealing their nostrils shut completely while underwater, along with skin capable of absorbing a meaningful portion of the oxygen they need directly from the surrounding seawater, reducing how often they actually need to surface for a proper breath. Their entire body, in many respects, has been gradually reshaped by evolution toward a fully aquatic lifestyle, considerably different from the desert or forest-dwelling relatives explored earlier in this story, and yet still built upon that exact same underlying foundation, hundreds of flexible vertebrae and carefully coordinated muscle. It is a genuinely striking example of just how far this same basic body plan can be stretched and reshaped, from a snake perfectly suited to dry desert sand, to one capable of spending its entire life gliding gracefully through open ocean water many miles from any shore at all. There is something almost poetic in that range, the very same basic architecture, hundreds of small bones and careful muscle, capable of thriving equally well in the driest desert on Earth and the deepest, saltiest ocean water, simply reshaped gradually, generation after generation, to fit whatever particular challenge its environment happened to present. Considering everything explored across this documentary now, from the humble beginnings of a single serpentine wiggle across a forest floor, to specialized gliding tree snakes and fully aquatic sea snakes navigating open ocean water, a genuinely remarkable range of possibility becomes clear. This entire spectrum, from simple crawling to gliding through open air to swimming through deep ocean water, all traces back to that same fundamental foundation explored at the very beginning of this story: hundreds of vertebrae, carefully coordinated muscle, and remarkably adaptable belly scales. Few other body plans found anywhere in the animal kingdom manage to stretch quite this far across such wildly different environments and specialized abilities, all without fundamentally changing the underlying structure at all. It is a testament to just how much can be accomplished through patient, gradual refinement of one single, simple idea, rather than constantly reinventing an entirely new solution for every new challenge encountered along the way. This adaptability likely explains, at least in part, why snakes have proven so remarkably successful and widespread across nearly every corner of the planet, a single body plan flexible enough to conquer sand, forest, branch, air, and ocean alike, refined patiently across tens of millions of years of quiet, continuous evolutionary change. Let us settle once more into a calmer, quieter reflection before gathering the final threads of this remarkable story together. Picture a wide, calm bay somewhere along a tropical coastline, warm evening light scattering softly across gentle waves. Somewhere beneath that calm surface, a sea snake moves slowly and gracefully through the water, its body rippling in that same smooth, familiar serpentine motion explored throughout so much of this documentary, simply adapted now toward water instead of solid ground. Further along that same coastline, tucked safely into a rocky crevice above the waterline, another kind of snake entirely rests quietly for the evening, its body coiled comfortably using that same careful, patient concertina style once needed to squeeze into such a tight, sheltering space in the first place. Two entirely different snakes, sharing the very same coastline, each perfectly suited to its own particular corner of that shared environment, each carrying forward the very same ancient, adaptable body plan explored throughout this entire journey. The waves continue their slow, steady rhythm against the shore, indifferent to either creature, while both snakes rest quietly in their own particular way, entirely at ease within an environment their ancestors spent millions of years gradually learning to master. As this documentary slowly approaches its close, it feels worth returning one final time to that very first image explored at the very beginning of this story, a snake moving silently forward with no legs at all, seemingly defying what should be physically possible. Everything covered since then, the hundreds of vertebrae, the several distinct movement styles, the individually controlled belly scales, the deep evolutionary history stretching back to actual, functioning legs, has simply been a patient attempt to explain exactly how that single, remarkable trick actually works. None of it happened quickly, or by accident. Every piece of this elaborate, carefully coordinated system exists today only because it worked, refined gradually across an almost unimaginable stretch of evolutionary time, generation after generation, until eventually it produced one of the most versatile and successful body plans found anywhere among land animals, equally at home in scorching desert sand, dense tropical canopy, or open ocean water many miles from shore. It is a story that continues unfolding quietly, every single day, in nearly every corner of this planet, largely unnoticed by most people who happen to glimpse a snake moving silently past, never quite realizing just how much careful, patient history sits quietly behind that smooth, effortless glide. Let us picture, one final time, all the scenes explored throughout this long, quiet journey together, a forest floor rippling gently beneath a gliding serpentine body, open desert sand marked with the distinctive looping trail of a sidewinder, a narrow canyon crevice holding a patient, folding concertina movement, a tall tree branch gripped securely by a careful climber, and finally, a calm ocean bay where a sea snake moves gracefully through open water far from any shore at all. Each scene entirely distinct, shaped by its own particular environment and challenge, and yet each one built upon that exact same underlying foundation explored so carefully throughout this entire documentary, hundreds of flexible vertebrae, precisely coordinated muscle, and remarkably adaptable belly scales, refined patiently across tens of millions of years since a distant ancestor first began trading away its own tiny, functioning legs for something else entirely. There is something deeply calming in recognizing this pattern, one simple, elegant design, endlessly adaptable, quietly thriving across nearly every environment this planet has to offer. Each of these images, gathered together now at the close of this long journey, tells the very same underlying story from a slightly different angle, patient, gradual evolution finding, again and again, new ways to make one simple idea work beautifully in an enormous range of circumstances, without ever once needing to start over from scratch. Bringing this entire remarkable journey together now, we have traveled from a snake's extraordinary skeleton, hundreds of vertebrae and ribs working together in careful coordination, through the several distinct movement styles suited to sand, forest floor, narrow crevice, open branch, and deep water alike, through the quiet, precise mechanics of individually controlled belly scales, and finally back through deep evolutionary time, to actual, functioning legs slowly fading into small, quiet remnants still carried by certain snakes even today. What began as a simple, strange question, how something without legs at all manages to move so gracefully across nearly every environment on Earth, has revealed itself to be a genuinely sophisticated, remarkably elegant system, refined patiently across tens of millions of years of quiet, gradual evolutionary change, stretching all the way from ordinary forest floors to open ocean water and everything meaningful in between. There is still a little more of this remarkable story worth sitting with, a final, gentle image gathering together every quiet scene explored throughout this whole documentary, before this long, patient journey finally comes to rest. And so, gently, we arrive at the true end of this long, quiet journey into one of nature's most remarkable hidden tricks. We began with a single, strange question, how something without legs at all manages to move so gracefully across nearly every environment on Earth, and slowly traced that question through hundreds of vertebrae, through several distinct movement styles built for sand, forest floor, narrow crevice, tree branch, and open water alike, through individually controlled belly scales working like tiny, precise treads, and finally back through deep evolutionary time, to actual, functioning legs slowly fading into small, quiet remnants some snakes still carry today. We traveled from a forest floor rippling gently beneath a gliding serpentine body, to open desert sand marked with a sidewinder's distinctive looping trail, to a narrow canyon crevice holding a patient, folding concertina movement, to a tall branch gripped securely by a careful climber, and finally to a calm ocean bay where a sea snake moved gracefully through open water far from any shore at all. Each of these scenes, so different on the surface, shared the very same quiet secret underneath, one simple, elegant body plan, refined patiently across tens of millions of years, flexible enough to conquer nearly any terrain this planet has to offer, all without a single leg to help it along. Somewhere out there tonight, in deserts, forests, rivers, and quiet ocean shallows scattered across the world, that same ancient, adaptable body continues its slow, silent glide, entirely unaware of just how remarkable and hard-won its own quiet movement actually is. Thank you for spending this calm, curious evening with us, uncovering the hidden trick behind one of nature's most graceful movers. If this journey helped you relax, unwind, and maybe even drift off along the way, consider liking the video, subscribing for more slow, thoughtful stories like this one, and sharing your own thoughts down in the comments below. Sleep peacefully, and good night.